It was an ordinary December night in 1968 when 17-year-old David Faraday and 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen decided to spend an evening together. It was one of their first dates, filled with the excitement and nervous energy of young love. They drove David's Rambler station wagon to Lake Herman Road, a quiet and secluded lover's lane on the outskirts of Vallejo, California. Unbeknownst to them, they were about to cross paths with a figure whose name would come to haunt the region for decades: the Zodiac Killer. The events of that night would later be pieced together by investigators, as no witnesses came forward, and the killer's actions left no room for survival. David and Betty Lou parked in a gravel turnout, a common stop for young couples seeking privacy. The road was dimly lit, flanked by rolling hills and sparse vegetation, offering solitude, but also making it a perfect hunting ground for someone with sinister intentions. At approximately 11:15 p.m., another vehicle pulled into the turnout, parking close to the Rambler. The Zodiac, whose identity remains unknown to this day, approached the couple's car. It is believed that he fired a warning shot into the Rambler's rear window, shattering the silence of the night and leaving the teenagers no choice but to exit the vehicle. What happened next was chilling in its cold, calculated precision. David Faraday was likely the killer's first target. As the young man stepped out of the car, perhaps in an attempt to protect Betty Lou, he was shot in the head at close range. The bullet entered just behind his left ear, killing him instantly. His body was found lying near the Rambler, sprawled on the ground as though he had collapsed in mid-action. Betty Lou, terrified and desperate to escape, made a run for it. She sprinted toward the open road, her feet pounding the cold ground in what must have been a futile attempt to flee her attacker. She didn't make it far. The killer fired 5 shots at her from a .22 caliber handgun, striking her in the back. Her lifeless body was found approximately 28 feet from the car, lying face down, her blood pooling into the dirt beneath her. The crime scene was a horrific tableau of violence and mystery. The killer left no traces of his identity, no footprints, and no clear motive. The attack seemed random, yet deliberate, as though the couple had been chosen simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It wasn't long before a passerby discovered the gruesome scene and contacted authorities. The sight of the shattered car window, David's body near the vehicle, and Betty Lou's further away painted a grim picture. Investigators combed the area, but there were no witnesses, no immediate leads, and little evidence beyond the shell casings from the killer's weapon. This double homicide shocked the Vallejo community. It was rare for such a violent and unprovoked crime to occur in this quiet area. But the true horror of the Lake Herman Road murders would only come into focus later, as it became clear that this was just the beginning of a series of attacks by a man who would later call himself the Zodiac Killer. Months after the murders, the Zodiac began sending letters to newspapers, claiming responsibility for the killings and providing details only the murderer would know. In these letters, he taunted law enforcement and the public alike, making it clear that he thrived on the fear and confusion his crimes created. The Lake Herman Road murders marked the start of the Zodiac Killer's reign of terror. For Betty Lou and David, their lives were tragically cut short, their dreams and futures obliterated in moments of unimaginable violence. For the rest of the world, their deaths became the chilling prologue to a saga of mystery and fear that remains unresolved to this day. On the warm summer night of July 4, 1969, Darling Farron, a 22-year-old waitress, and Michael Mageau, her 19-year-old companion, drove to Blue Rock Springs Park, just a few miles from Vallejo, California. The park was a quiet spot, popular among locals as a place to relax and talk, away from the bustle of the town. Unbeknownst to them, this serene outing would turn into a nightmare, orchestrated by the same figure responsible for the Lake Herman Road murders months earlier, the Zodiac Killer. The couple parked in the lot, engaging in conversation while seated in Darling's brown Corvair. The park was sparsely populated that night, and the only sounds were the distant crackle of fireworks celebrating Independence Day. At approximately 11:55 p.m., another vehicle entered the parking lot. It drove past the couple before abruptly stopping behind their car. Michael noticed the vehicle and assumed it might be a police officer checking on them, as the area was often patrolled to prevent loitering. However, the driver of the car, who would later be identified as the Zodiac Killer, had far more sinister intentions. Moments later, the vehicle left, only to return a few minutes later, parking in the same spot. Without warning, the man exited his car and approached the couple's vehicle with a flashlight in one hand and a weapon in the other. The beam of the flashlight shone directly into their eyes, momentarily blinding them. Before they could react or identify the man, he began firing a 9mm Luger handgun through the driver's side window. Michael was struck first, hit in the jaw, shoulder, and leg. Despite his injuries, he survived the attack and later recounted the horrifying experience. Darlene, sitting in the driver's seat, was hit multiple times as the killer methodically fired 9 rounds into the vehicle. She suffered fatal wounds and was unable to escape. After the initial barrage of gunfire, the assailant began to walk back toward his vehicle. However, noticing signs of movement from Michael, he returned to the car and fired additional shots, ensuring his victims were incapacitated. The killer then calmly left the scene, vanishing into the darkness. At around 12:10 a.m., less than an hour after the attack, a call was placed to the Vallejo Police Department. The voice on the other end was calm, measured, and chillingly void of emotion. The caller, who identified himself as the Zodiac Killer, confessed to the shooting at Blue Rock Springs Park. He provided specific details about the crime, including the type of weapon used, and went further to claim responsibility for the Lake Herman Road murders. The phone call was traced to a payphone at a gas station located just a few blocks from the Vallejo Police Department. Police arrived at the scene shortly after the call. Darlene was found slumped over in the driver's seat, critically injured and unresponsive. Michael, though severely wounded, was conscious and able to provide a limited description of the attacker. He described the shooter as a heavy-set man, around 5'8" to 5'10", with short, light curly hair. Despite his injuries, Michael survived the attack, but Darlene was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. The crime scene left investigators with little evidence to pursue. Shell casings from the 9mm weapon were recovered, and Michael's account of the events provided some insight into the killer's appearance, but no solid leads emerged. The Zodiac's phone call added to the mounting fear, as it became clear that this was not a random act, but the work of a methodical and calculating killer. The attack at Blue Rock Springs Park marked the second confirmed strike by the Zodiac Killer. His ability to commit brutal crimes and then vanish without a trace, combined with his chilling communications, plunged the community into fear. This attack solidified his status as a cold-blooded predator, one whose identity continues to evade capture and whose name remains synonymous with terror. On September 27, 1969, college students Brian Hartnell, 20, and Cecilia Shepard, 22, spent the afternoon at Lake Berryessa, a serene spot near Napa, California. The couple chose a quiet area near the water to relax, unaware they were being watched by one of the most infamous criminals in American history, the Zodiac Killer. As they sat on a blanket, a man wearing a black hood approached. The hood covered his entire head, with eye and mouth cutouts, and on his chest was a crosshair symbol. The man carried a gun and claimed he was an escaped convict who needed money and a car to flee to Mexico. Calm but commanding, he ordered Cecilia to tie Brian's hands with a clothesline. And she complied under duress, and the man then tied her hands and secured both of them face down. Without warning, the attacker pulled out a knife. He stabbed Brian 6 times in the back and then turned on Cecilia, stabbing her 10 times in her back and abdomen. After the attack, the man walked calmly up the hill to the road. Before leaving, he marked Brian's white Volkswagen Karmann Ghia with his crosshair symbol. Below it, he wrote the dates of his previous murders: December 20, 1968, and July 4, 1969, alongside the current date, September 27, 1969, and the words "by knife." Despite their severe injuries, Brian and Cecilia survived the initial attack. Brian later described the killer as calm and unemotional, carrying out the assault with chilling detachment. At 7:40 p.m., the Zodiac called the Napa County Sheriff's Office from a nearby payphone. In a measured tone, he reported the attack, gave directions to the scene, and claimed responsibility, signing off with, "I am the one who did it." Police arrived to find the couple alive but critically injured. They were rushed to the hospital, but Cecilia succumbed to her injuries 2 days later. Brian survived and provided a description of the attacker: heavyset, 5'8" to 6'0", with dark brown hair visible through the hood. The Lake Berryessa attack marked the Zodiac's most personal crime, showcasing his calculated nature and unrelenting brutality. Despite leaving behind evidence, he escaped again, cementing his legacy of fear.